Good evening, and welcome back to Haunted Tales. Tonight we set foot in a land unlike any other, Alaska. A place of breathtaking beauty, endless mountains, and icy waters stretching farther than the eye can see. But beneath its pristine surface lies something else. A darkness that has haunted travelers, locals, and explorers for centuries. This isn't just wilderness. This is a graveyard of secrets. The final frontier where myths and reality blur together. Where men vanish without a trace, where lights burn in the sky with no explanation, and where legends crawl out of the forests and rivers to remind us we are not alone. Tonight, we step into the frozen heart of 10 of Alaska's most disturbing mysteries, tales that remain unresolved, chilling, and all too real. From icy mountains to bottomless lakes, from cursed forests to the endless sky, each unresolved, each whispering the same chilling truth: Alaska is not empty. Alaska is alive. And as we journey deeper into these stories tonight, remember this: every encounter you will hear has been told before. By pilots, by hunters, by villagers who packed up and left their homes forever. The land does not lie. If you are new here, then please subscribe to Haunted Tales and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new horror tales. So, as the snow falls and the aurora flickers, settle in. Let the shadows of Alaska surround you, because the mysteries we're about to explore may never let you go. If you were to spread a map of Alaska across your table and trace a triangle between Anchorage, Juneau, and Barrow, you'd be looking at one of the most mysterious and feared regions on Earth. Locals whisper its name in tones somewhere between awe and dread: the Alaska Triangle. It is here, across tundra plains, icy mountain ranges, and vast forests, that an impossible number of people and aircraft have simply vanished. No wreckage, no survivors, often not even a distress call, just silence, like the land itself swallowed them whole. The sheer scale is staggering. It's estimated that more than 16,000 people have disappeared in this region since 1988 alone. That's twice the national average of missing persons in the United States. Search teams find nothing but endless white snow, shifting ice, and dense spruce forests that seem to close in tighter the longer you stare into them. But statistics only tell part of the story. The chilling details come from those who've lived to tell what they saw, and from the families who never got answers. On January 26, 1950, a U.S. Air Force C-54 Skymaster left Anchorage bound for Great Falls, Montana. Aboard were 44 passengers and crew. For the first part of its flight, all seemed normal. Weather reports were favorable, communications clear. Then, somewhere over the Chugach Mountains, the radio crackled with static, and the aircraft went silent. No mayday, no signal of trouble. It simply vanished. What followed was one of the largest search and rescue missions in U.S. history. More than 85 aircraft, thousands of searchers, and weeks of combing every valley and glacier. But nothing was ever found. Not a wing, not a seat cushion, not a scrap of metal. It was as though the plane had flown into the clouds and dissolved. Families waited for answers that never came. The Air Force eventually declared the case closed, but to this day, there has never been an explanation. This was not an isolated case. Over the decades, countless private planes, bush pilots, and even commercial flights have reported terrifying experiences inside the triangle. Pilots losing navigational instruments without warning, radios cutting into bursts of static, voices whispering faintly in the background, planes circling in confusion, unable to orient themselves despite clear skies. Entire flights vanishing without radar or visual confirmation. It became clear that whatever stalks the Alaska Triangle doesn't discriminate between experienced aviators or amateurs. It can take anyone. In 1986, bush pilot Raymond Parker was ferrying supplies between Anchorage and Nome when his instruments suddenly failed. The altimeter spun wildly, the compass needle jerked back and forth, and the horizon outside his cockpit flickered with strange, greenish light. Raymond later described it as if the sky itself had gone dead. He struggled to regain control, fighting turbulence that came out of nowhere. Then, just as suddenly, everything stabilized. His dials returned, the air smoothed, and the eerie glow vanished. He landed safely, but admitted that he had no memory of the last 10 minutes of the flight. When interviewed, he swore there was something unnatural about the triangle, something that plays with time. He wasn't alone. Many other pilots have reported lost time, minutes, even hours unaccounted for, once they emerge from the area. Long before aviation, long before maps and radar, Alaska's indigenous peoples spoke of the triangle as a place not meant for humans. The Tlingit and Inupiat tribes told stories of spirits in the mountains that could lure travelers off their path. Some legends describe the Kushtaka, shape-shifting, beings who mimic voices to draw victims into rivers, never to be seen again. Others tell of mountain gods who demand sacrifices and swallow trespassers into the ice. To these communities, the disappearances are not random. They are warnings ignored. When modern society calls it a triangle, they see it as a sacred boundary that no one should cross. Perhaps the most infamous case in the Alaska Triangle happened on October 16, 1972. A twin-engine Cessna carrying U.S. House Majority Leader Hale Boggs, Congressman Nick Begich, their aide, and pilot Don Johns disappeared en route from Anchorage to Juneau. The political implications were enormous. Boggs was one of the most powerful men in Congress. The disappearance triggered an unprecedented search: 40 military aircraft, 50 civilian planes, and hundreds of ground searchers. For 39 days, they scoured 32,000 square miles. Nothing. To this day, not a single shred of wreckage has been recovered. No bodies, no black box, nothing. Conspiracy theories swirl. Was it sabotage, political assassination, or just another victim claimed by the Triangle? The truth has never surfaced. Travelers on the Dalton Highway, which cuts into the Triangle, have their own stories. Truckers speak of strange orbs of light appearing in the distance, pacing their rigs for miles. Sometimes the lights vanish into the tree line. Other times they streak upward into the stars, defying the laws of physics. One trucker, Dale Mitchell, described it this way: "It wasn't headlights. It wasn't a plane. It moved too fast, then slowed right down like it was watching me. I pulled over, killed the engine, and it just hovered, no sound, then gone, straight up into the black sky." UFO researchers believe the Alaska Triangle overlaps with a corridor of unusually high electromagnetic activity, making it a hotspot for unexplained aerial phenomena. Skeptics call it imagination. But Mitchell never drove that stretch of road alone again. The disappearances aren't limited to aircraft. Hikers and hunters vanish here as well. Search parties often find footprints in fresh snow, but then inexplicably the tracks stop. No drag marks, no signs of struggle, just an abrupt end, as if the person was plucked from the earth. One chilling case involved a hunter named Mark Grayson in 2001. His party followed his boot prints for nearly 2 miles across open tundra. Then the prints simply ended in the middle of a clearing. Helicopter sweeps found no body, no clothing, no equipment. It was as though the ground had swallowed him whole. Adding to the Triangle's mystery is a rumor that beneath the Alaskan wilderness lies a giant underground pyramid, larger than Giza's Great Pyramid. The story first surfaced in the 1990s, when a Chinese nuclear test allegedly revealed subterranean structures via seismic waves. Conspiracy theorists claim this black pyramid emits strong electromagnetic fields that disrupt navigation and radar, explaining the vanishings. Locals tell of restricted zones where the military forbids entry, fueling speculation that something is being hidden. Whether myth or reality, the pyramid theory deepens the Triangle's eerie reputation. Picture this: a small bush plane cutting through the winter sky. The engine hums steady, the pilot calm. Then static floods the radio. The compass needle jerks, the horizon blurs. Passengers glance nervously out the window. Below, endless white stretches forever. The pilot calls in one last transmission. "We're experiencing some trouble with navigation. Hold on." Then silence. The radar blip disappears. Families wait at the airstrip for loved ones who will never arrive. Hours stretch into days. The snow falls heavier. The search begins, but in the Alaska Triangle, searches often end in the same way: emptiness. Scientists suggest rational explanations: geography, jagged mountains, sudden storms, and magnetic anomalies that interfere with compasses. Weather. Alaska's climate can shift violently, blinding pilots in snow squalls. Wilderness. A crash site can vanish under snow or sink into glaciers, never to be recovered. But even with logic, something. It was the dead of winter in Alaska, January 26, 1950. The temperature outside Anchorage dipped well below freezing. Winds whistled through the spruce trees, and the skies stretched a steel gray. At Elmendorf Air Force Base, a Douglas C-54 Skymaster prepared for departure. The Skymaster was no ordinary aircraft. This four-engine transport plane had proven itself in World War II, ferrying troops, equipment, and supplies across oceans and continents. Rugged, reliable, designed to withstand punishment. On that night, it carried 44 passengers and crew, military personnel. Civilians and flight staff headed for Great Falls, Montana. At 1:44 p.m. local time, the C-54 rolled down the icy runway and lifted into the sky, its massive wings slicing through low clouds. Radio contact was steady. The pilot reported nothing unusual. For all intents and purposes, this was just another flight, one of dozens that crisscrossed Alaska's dangerous air corridors every day. No one knew it would never arrive. Roughly 2 hours into the journey, the plane checked in over the Chugach Mountains. The pilot's voice crackled through radio static, calm and professional. He gave his position, altitude, and weather report. It was the kind of routine call every control tower expected. Minutes later, Anchorage Air Traffic Control tried to raise the plane again. Silence. They tried a second time. Silence. Radar technicians noticed something alarming. The Skymaster's blip had vanished from their scopes. One moment it was there, steady, on course. The next gone. Controllers assumed an equipment failure. Maybe the C-54 had dropped below radar coverage. But as the minutes dragged on and no further signals came through, the truth became harder to ignore. The Skymaster had disappeared. The Air Force did not wait long. By evening, alarms were raised. This wasn't just another lost bush plane. This was a military aircraft carrying dozens of souls. The Cold War was entering its fevered stage, and fears of sabotage or Soviet interference lurked in every shadow. By dawn, the search was on, and it was unlike anything Alaska had ever seen. More than 85 aircraft, bombers, transports, reconnaissance planes fanned out across the wilderness. 7,000 ground troops were deployed, trudging through snow, combing valleys, crossing frozen rivers. Helicopters hovered low, their rotors thundering across glacial fields. Even Canadian forces lent assistance. The skies above Alaska roared with activity, a desperate swarm of metal birds searching for one of their own. But Alaska is not forgiving. The very terrain seemed to mock the searchers. Snow fell heavy and relentless, erasing tracks, covering wreckage, hiding evidence. Mountains jutted upward like jagged teeth, their slopes treacherous with ice. Vast forests stretched in every direction, dense enough to conceal entire buildings, let alone a single plane. The search crews described the sensation as both awe-inspiring and horrifying. From the air, the land looked endless, featureless, a frozen ocean of white. From the ground, it swallowed sound, silence pressing down like a weight every hour. Every day that passed without discovery, the probability of survival dropped. In the days that followed, reports trickled in. Villagers claimed they saw a massive plane flying low before vanishing into clouds. A pilot swore he spotted wreckage glinting on a mountainside. A ground team found what they thought were pieces of fuselage, but each lead dissolved under scrutiny. The villagers had likely seen a different aircraft. The supposed wreckage was nothing more than ice reflecting the sun. The debris turned out to be unrelated. Still, hope clung stubbornly. Families of the missing crowded into chapels, clutching photographs, praying for news. Newspapers printed bold headlines. Search continues for lost C-54. Yet the truth was unchanging. Nothing. For 3 straight weeks, the military scoured 350,000 square miles. To put that into perspective, that's an area larger than Texas. Planes crisscrossed in tight grids, observers peering from frosted windows, eyes aching from scanning endless snow. Ground patrols pushed themselves to exhaustion, fighting frostbite, hypothermia, and terrain that resisted every step. And still, nothing. No fuselage, no black box, no bodies. On February 14th, after 15,000 man-hours of searching, the Air Force made a grim announcement. The official mission was being called off. The C-54 Skymaster and its 44 souls had simply vanished. Years later, rumors and whispers continued. Some Alaskans claim they heard a thunderous crash echoing through valleys that night, yet no impact site was ever found. A few bush pilots swore they saw strange lights darting across the same skies, a luminous phenomenon that defied explanation. One search pilot, Captain Leonard Fisk, later admitted, "It was as if something was interfering with our equipment. Compasses spun, radios went dead. Once I thought I saw a shadow of a plane banking just ahead of me, but there was nothing there." These testimonies raised uncomfortable questions. Could the Skymaster have been pulled into the same strange forces whispered about in Alaska's Triangle? Or were these merely the hallucinations of exhausted men flying long hours in deadly conditions? For the families of the lost, the search ending was not closure, it was torment. Wives wrote letters begging the Air Force not to give up. Children waited by windows, convinced their fathers would come walking up the road. Parents held funerals without coffins, laying flowers on empty graves. The absence of wreckage meant the absence of answers. No one could explain how a 4-engine transport plane the size of a house could vanish without a trace. Some believed the Skymaster had crashed into a glacier, buried instantly under tons of shifting ice, entombed forever. Others whispered about Soviet capture, secret experiments, even alien abduction. Conspiracy or not, the truth was unbearable. 44 lives were gone, erased in a blink. Over time, the story of the missing C-54 became a cornerstone of Alaskan lore, a case cited whenever another plane went missing in the wilderness. The triangle seemed to claim victims without pattern or reason. In 2012, researchers revisited the case using satellite imagery and updated mapping technology. A few anomalies were noted in the Wrangell Mountains, dark shapes beneath the ice. But once again, expeditions revealed nothing. The Skymaster remained hidden. 70+ years later, it is as though the plane never existed. Imagine the final moments. Inside the Skymaster's cabin, passengers sit bundled in heavy coats. Some play cards, others stare out frost-rimmed windows at endless whiteness below. The engines drone steady, a sound both reassuring and hypnotic. The pilot checks his instruments, everything in order. Then, without warning, the radio fills with static. The compass needle jumps erratically. The horizon outside seems to blur, as though the sky itself is. On the southern tip of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula lies a place where time itself seems to have stopped. The forests are thick, the waters icy and relentless, and the mountains loom like silent guardians. Here sits the remnants of Port Chatham, or Portlock, as it's sometimes called, a village that once bustled with fishermen, families, and industry. But today nothing. Empty beaches, collapsed cabins, tools left behind as if the owners fled mid-sentence. It is a ghost town, and according to those who still whisper its name, it was never abandoned because of economics or weather. It was left because something in the forests, something ancient and inhuman, hunted the people until they had no choice but to leave. Village with a past Port Chatham was established in the early 1900s, built on fishing and cannery operations. The sea offered rich harvests, and the surrounding forests promised game. But from its earliest days, something felt wrong. Hunters went missing, loggers failed to return, and stories spread of strange footprints in the snow. Massive, human-like, but twisted, as if the foot belonged to something heavier, broader, more primal. The native Alutiiq people had already warned of this land. They spoke of the Nantinak, a terrifying being, part human, part beast, known to lurk in the shadowed valleys. To the locals, the warnings were not folklore. They were instructions. Do not settle there. Do not wander into its forests. The settlers, eager for industry, ignored the words. And for a time, they paid no mind to the stories. Until the deaths began. The vanishings. By the 1920s and 1930s, hunters would enter the thick spruce forests and never come back. Some were later found, but not whole. Bodies were discovered torn apart, bones snapped, flesh shredded. One fisherman described finding a corpse mangled in a way no bear or wolf could do, almost like it had been twisted apart by enormous hands. Others saw shadows in the trees, towering figures that moved just out of sight, heavy footfalls echoing in the silence. Loggers reported hearing rocks being hurled from deep within the forest, sometimes so massive they crashed through treetops. Families spoke of hearing guttural screams at night, so loud they shook walls and sent children cowering under blankets. And then came the footprints. Hunters would return wide-eyed, swearing they had tracked moose only to find the trail overtaken by enormous humanoid prints. One hunter wrote, "It walked upright, 2 legs, heavy. I followed until I realized the prints circled behind me. It was hunting me." He never went back. Life in fear. Despite the fear, people stayed. Work had to be done. The cannery kept running. But life in Port Chatham became marked by paranoia. Doors were bolted early. No one ventured into the forest alone. Children were warned never to stray past the edge of the village. Even then, the noises came at night. Knocks on walls, scratching on doors, deep breathing just beyond thin wooden boards. One family claimed to have seen a massive figure watching from the tree line as they gathered firewood. Its eyes, they swore, reflected light like an animal's. When they screamed, it didn't move. It only tilted its head, slowly, curiously, as if studying them. The final straw. The terror reached its peak in the 1940s. Multiple men went missing within weeks of each other. Some hunters were found dead, dragged into caves high in the cliffs, their bodies broken beyond recognition. A logger disappeared after stepping only a few feet into the woods. Blood was found in the snow. His axe lay abandoned. He was never seen again. By 1949, the fear had reached breaking point. Families packed what they could carry and fled by boat, leaving behind homes, tools, even half-prepared meals. Within months, Port Chatham stood silent. No fires burned. No children laughed. Just empty cabins staring out at the bay. The village was dead. Whispers from survivors. Decades later, survivors of Port Chatham still whispered about what they saw. An elderly fisherman interviewed in the 1970s confessed, "It wasn't bears. It wasn't wolves. We knew what bears looked like. This was something that walked like us, but bigger, stronger, meaner. Nantinak. It hunted us until we had no choice." Another woman recalled how her father had returned from hunting with his face pale, his hands shaking. He never spoke of what he saw, but he sold his rifle the next day and refused to step foot in the forest again. For the rest of his life, he stayed away from the Kenai Peninsula. Modern expeditions, in recent years, adventurers and paranormal researchers have tried to uncover the truth of Port Chatham. Some camp in the ruins of the old village. Many don't last the night. They report hearing heavy footfalls circling their tents. Some claim to hear rocks crashing through the forest, just as the loggers once described. In 2019, a team of investigators recorded strange vocalizations in the woods. One described it as a scream mixed with a growl, so loud it made the ground vibrate. Their cameras caught glowing eyes in the distance. When they approached, nothing was there, only broken branches and enormous prints in the mud. Locals warn outsiders, "You can visit, but don't stay long. It doesn't like company." The curse of the Nantinak, the indigenous people still hold to their warnings. They say the Nantinak is not just a creature, but a guardian, a punisher, something bound to the land. Some elders whisper that the settlers broke a taboo by building their village there, and the Nantinak simply drove them out, as it always would. Hunters in the Kenai Peninsula still speak of strange encounters. Massive shapes glimpsed between trees, heavy breathing in the fog, the feeling of being stalked even when alone. Sometimes they find carcasses of moose, torn apart in unnatural ways. Always the same silence in the air, as though the forest itself is holding its breath. Otro, the village that remains empty today. Port Chatham remains a ghost town. The cabins rot. Moss creeps up the walls. Fishing nets lie tangled where they were left 70 years ago. Boats rest overturned on rocky shores. It is as if time froze the day the last villager fled. Few dare to set foot there, and those who do rarely linger. Some mysteries fade with time. Port Chatham has only grown darker. It stands as a warning carved into the Alaskan coast that there are places humans were never meant to claim. Places where older laws rule. And when the fog creeps in from the bay, and the forests fall silent, some say you can still hear it. Heavy footsteps circling, patient, waiting for those foolish enough to return. Alaska is a land carved by rivers, fjords, and frozen coastlines where the tides crash endlessly against jagged rocks. In these waters, stories older than memory live and breathe. Among the Tlingit and other indigenous peoples of southeast Alaska, there is a name whispered with caution, a name that carries dread far beyond folklore. They call them the Kushtaka. To outsiders, the word means little, but to those who know the wilderness, it is the embodiment of terror. A shape-shifting creature, part man, part otter, that mimics voices and lures victims toward icy waters. Once caught, a person is either torn apart, dragged beneath the current, or transformed into another Kushtaka, cursed to wander the shoreline forever. This is no fairy tale meant to frighten children into obedience. Generations of hunters, fishermen, and travelers claim to have seen or heard the creature. The stories remain consistent across time: the sound of a loved one's voice crying for help, the sudden glimpse of an otter walking upright, or the eerie laughter echoing across a fog-choked riverbank. The legend stretches deep into the oral traditions of the Tlingit. They describe Kushtaka as tricksters, spirits that can appear in many forms. Sometimes they look like a friend or family member, waving frantically for you to follow. Other times they take the guise of a harmless otter, standing just out of reach on the rocks, watching with human eyes. The Tlingit warn: once you answer the call, once you step too close to the shore, you may never return. For Kushtaka do not just kill, they consume what makes a person human, the soul itself. Skeptics dismiss these tales as superstition, an imaginative explanation for drownings and vanishings in Alaska's dangerous waters. But the number of unexplained disappearances, coupled with eerie consistencies in testimony, forces one to wonder, are these warnings simply cultural myths or something far more real? In 1900, a prospector named Harry Culp documented a story told to him by a fellow miner who ventured into Thomas Bay, later nicknamed the Bay of Death. The miner claimed he encountered strange, hairy creatures near the shoreline, neither animal nor man. While this account is often linked with Bigfoot lore, locals insist what he saw could have been Kushtaka. The creatures followed him, their movements unnatural, their voices carrying across the fog. When he fled, he swore he heard what sounded like human screams, muffled by the rush of water. One of the most chilling Kushtaka stories comes from a trapper who set lines near Wrangell. He wrote in his journal about hearing a baby crying late at night. The sound was impossible to ignore, fragile, pitiful, echoing across the river. He grabbed his lantern and rifle, following the sound to the water's edge. There, through the mist, he saw an otter standing on two legs. Its mouth moved in time with the baby's cries. But its eyes, he would later write, were unmistakably human. He fired a shot, and the creature vanished into the current with a splash. The crying stopped instantly. The trapper left his camp the next morning, abandoning his lines and gear. He never returned. Even today, strange vanishings along riverbanks and coastlines keep the Kushtaka legend alive. In 2005, a group of kayakers near Sitka reported hearing a woman screaming in the distance. When they paddled closer, the sound shifted, first into laughter, then into what one described as a high-pitched, chattering whistle. The shoreline was empty. No footprints in the sand, no boats nearby. One kayaker swore he saw an otter watching them from the rocks, standing upright. When they returned to camp that night, they found their food stores scattered and deep claw marks in the sand. Authorities filed it as wildlife disturbance, but locals quietly told them that wasn't wildlife. That was Kushtaka. One element of the legend is disturbingly consistent: the mimicry. Survivors describe hearing voices of people they know, sometimes relatives who weren't even nearby. Others hear the desperate call of a child. This ability to prey on human empathy makes the Kushtaka so feared. Consider this: you're alone on a foggy trail. The night is silent except for the rush of a river below. Suddenly you hear your brother's voice calling for help. You rush toward the sound, heart racing. But at the edge of the water, there's no one. Only the gleam of wet fur, the flash of teeth, and the sick realization that you've been lured into a trap. Imagine a driver along the Richardson Highway. The snow is coming down heavy, flakes swirling in the beam of headlights. He pulls over near a turnout by the Copper River to rest. The night is deathly still, broken only by the groan of shifting ice. Then it comes, the sound of a child sobbing. At first faint, then clearer. He opens the door, stepping into the frigid air. "Hello?" he calls, his voice carrying into the dark. The crying shifts into laughter. Light, airy wrong. His breath clouds in front of him as he sees movement on the shoreline below. A small figure, hunched with a glistening coat. It stands. Its face catches the moonlight, part human, part something else. By the time he scrambles back into his truck, slamming the door and locking it, the laughter is surrounding him, coming from the tree line, from the river, from every shadow. When he finally drives away, heart pounding, the sound follows until the highway swallows it whole. He never reports it. Only later, when hearing locals mention Kushtaka, does he realize what he might have faced. Alaska has one of the highest rates of drowning in North America. Officials blame cold temperatures, rough currents, and unprepared boaters. But some locals whisper another reason. They say the Kushtaka drag victims into the water. That's why so many bodies are never recovered. They're not lost to the current, they're taken. The Tlingit believe shamans once knew rituals to ward off the Kushtaka, copper charms, dog companions, or simple acts of defiance like resisting the urge to follow the cries. But in a modern world where few remember these protections, the creatures have free rein. In the small community of Kake, elders still tell cautionary tales. One speaks of a hunter who disappeared in the 1980s. His companions found his rifle leaning against a tree, his tracks leading toward a frozen inlet. But the footprints stopped abruptly at the water's edge. No broken ice, no sign of a fall, just gone. To this day, some in Kake refuse to walk near the shoreline after dark. They say the Kushtaka are most active at night, when the tide is high and the mist rolls in heavy. Skeptics chalk it up to superstition mixed with Alaska's brutal environment. But even seasoned outdoorsmen, men who laugh off ghost stories, admit something strange lingers near the water. A sense of being watched. Sudden sounds with no source. The echo of a voice that shouldn't be there. And though no photograph, no body, and no physical proof has ever been produced, the testimonies remain. Alaska is a graveyard of planes. Its mountains, rivers, and glaciers stretch into horizons that seem endless, but they conceal dangers that even the most skilled pilots can't anticipate. Sudden storms, magnetic anomalies, valleys that funnel deadly winds. In these skies, radar blips vanish. Distress calls go unanswered. But in October of 1972, the wilderness did not just claim hunters or anonymous travelers. It claimed men whose names carried weight in the United States Capitol. 2 congressmen, their aide, and a seasoned pilot disappeared into thin air. Their story is remembered not only for its tragedy, but for its unsettling silence. No wreckage was found. No remains. Just a void in the Alaskan sky that swallows answers to this day. October 16, 1972, Anchorage. The day dawned gray, a heavy ceiling of cloud pressing down on the city. At Merrill Field, a twin-engine Cessna 310 stood ready, its aluminum skin glinting with beads of condensation. The pilot, Don Jones, was meticulous. Known for his experience in Alaskan air routes, he inspected the plane with care, checking instruments, fuel, wings, and propellers. He had flown through worse weather before. Inside the terminal, Congressman Nick Begich of Alaska adjusted his coat, trying to ward off the morning chill. Beside him stood Hale Boggs, House Majority Leader from Louisiana. Boggs was in Alaska campaigning with his colleague, a favor to strengthen Begich's re-election. Boggs was charismatic, tall, his presence commanding even in casual conversation. Yet there was a heaviness to his demeanor, as though he carried burdens unseen. Their aide, Russell Brown, carried documents and a leather satchel. He was younger, eager, his eyes bright but his movements restless. For him, this was a chance to be near power, close enough to glimpse the machinery of politics at its highest levels. The 4 men shook hands, exchanged light jokes, and boarded the plane. Witnesses recall Boggs hesitating briefly before stepping inside, glancing once at the cloud-draped mountains beyond the runway. Some say it was nerves. Others swear it looked like premonition. At 9 a.m., the Cessna's engines roared to life. The aircraft taxied, turned, and lifted smoothly into the sky, climbing into the gray veil. Radio contact was normal at first. Anchorage Center tracked the plane, altitude steady, course aimed toward Juneau. Then came static. Controllers waited for the Cessna's next position check. Silence. They called again. Still silence. By mid-morning, when no further communication came, concern hardened into alarm. Somewhere over Alaska's wilderness, the plane had simply disappeared. Imagine the moments inside that plane. The engines hum steadily, the cabin cramped but warm. Begich studies campaign notes, rehearsing speeches in a low murmur. Russell Brown flips nervously through documents, the turbulence causing papers to flutter. Hale Boggs sits quietly, staring out the window. Below him, mountains rise like frozen giants, their peaks shrouded in mist. He shifts uneasily. Boggs was no stranger to danger. He had stood against the FBI, criticized Hoover, and served on the Warren Commission investigating President Kennedy's assassination. He knew the sharp edges of power, and perhaps he sensed something in the air heavier than weather. The plane shudders. Don Johns tightens his grip on the controls. He flicks the radio switch. Static hisses. Anchorage Center, this is... The words cut out, then only silence. The news spread like wildfire. 2 congressmen, one of them one of the most powerful Democrats in Washington, had vanished. President Nixon authorized an immediate response. Within hours, hundreds of search planes combed the skies. Helicopters skimmed mountain ridges. Coast Guard ships patrolled waterways. Ground teams trudged into forests where even compasses faltered. For 39 days, more than 325 aircraft searched over 325,000 square miles. Pilots flew low and slow, eyes straining for the glint of wreckage, the scar of impact. Volunteers endured snow, storms, and exhaustion, yet nothing surfaced. Not a wing, not a fuselage, not even an oil slick. The Alaskan wilderness remained mute, its silence heavier with each passing day. Searchers began whispering of oddities. Bush pilots reported glimpses of metal flashes on distant ridges, but when teams checked, nothing remained. Some claimed to hear faint emergency beacons, a pulsing tone on the radio that flickered and then died. Others living in remote villages swore they heard voices over shortwave radios, garbled pleas for help, voices calling out names. One pilot later admitted, it was like chasing ghosts. Every time you thought you found them, the wilderness swallowed it back up. With no wreckage, speculation turned dark. Some pointed at Hale Boggs's political enemies. Months earlier, he had accused J. Edgar Hoover's FBI of corruption and overreach. He had called for reforms, breaking ranks with his own party's silence. Could he have been silenced permanently? Others suspected sabotage, a bomb placed aboard, a flight path deliberately misreported. Without evidence, the questions hang like frost in the air, chilling but never answered. Then there were whispers of the Alaska Triangle, a region infamous for vanishing planes and people. In that same decade, dozens of aircraft went missing, never recovered. Some locals believed magnetic anomalies or even something otherworldly had swallowed the Cessna. UFO sightings that month only deepened the mystery. In Washington, grief collided with suspicion. Boggs's wife, Lindy, later a congresswoman herself, struggled with the void left behind. Their daughter, journalist Cokie Roberts, never fully accepted the official narrative. In Alaska, the Begich family was equally shattered. Nick Begich's young son, Mark, was only 10. He grew up under the shadow of a father lost to the wilderness. Decades later, Mark himself became a U.S. senator, but the mystery never left him. For Russell Brown's family, the tragedy was quieter, but no less devastating. Their son's name rarely made headlines, but his absence carved just as deep a wound. Searchers reluctantly conceded defeat. On November 24th, the official operation ended. Planes grounded, helicopters returned, boots left the snow. The wilderness had given nothing back. Even today, pilots warn each other of the dangers on that route. They glance at their instruments, check their radios twice, and remember the names Boggs, Begich, Brown, and Johns. Picture a search pilot flying low over a glacier. The sun dips, painting the ice blood red. Through the windshield, he swears he sees something, an unnatural shadow lodged in the snow. Heart racing, he circles, radios in the coordinates. Ground teams arrive hours later. Nothing, no wreckage. Only fresh snowfall, smooth and untouched, the pilot insists. He knows what he saw, yet the wilderness erases all evidence. That is Alaska's power. Mechanical failure. Plausible, but why no distress call? Don Johns was skilled enough to broadcast even seconds before impact. Disorientation, whiteout conditions can trick even veterans, but the weather that day was not extreme. Sabotage, Boggs's enemies were real. But proof? None. The unknown, perhaps the most unsettling theory, that something beyond comprehension claimed them. A pocket of earth where the rules bend, where planes vanish not by crash but by removal. The absence of answers haunts more than the families. It haunts Alaska itself. It is a reminder of the fragility of life in the last frontier. That even power, influence, and search planes cannot overcome the wilderness's silence. Decades later, not a scrap of wreckage has emerged. The glaciers shift, the forests burn, the rivers carve new paths. But the Cessna remains hidden, as though the Earth itself conspired to erase it. When you fly over Alaska, and the clouds break for a moment to reveal endless white peaks below, remember this: somewhere under that vast expanse, 4 men vanished. Perhaps their plane lies buried in ice. Perhaps it rests at the bottom of a river. Or perhaps it has slipped into a place where no search can reach. Hail bogs. Alaska is a land of contradictions. Its wilderness is breathtaking yet merciless, stretching further than the human eye can comprehend. Towering mountains claw at the sky, endless forests weave like a labyrinth, and valleys plunge into silence so deep it feels alive. Beneath the shimmering curtains of the aurora borealis, beauty disguises danger. But there are whispers that not all dangers are natural. Buried beneath the ice and stone may lie something not of this world, something larger, darker, and more ancient than history itself. This is the mystery of the Black Pyramid of Alaska. Some call it myth, others conspiracy. Yet the stories persist, of seismic readings that defy explanation, of strange military operations in the Alaskan wild, of locals who vanish after speaking too openly. The Black Pyramid is said to dwarf the Great Pyramid of Giza, hidden deep beneath the Denali region, pulsing with energy, distorting compasses, and silencing those who come too close. And the most unsettling question of all: if it truly exists, why is it being kept from us? The modern tale begins in 1992. Half a world away, China detonated an underground nuclear device. The shockwaves traveled across the Earth, rippling into monitoring stations worldwide. In Alaska, one such station, buried deep beneath the frozen ground, recorded something strange. When the seismic echoes returned, they didn't merely pass through bedrock as expected. They bounced, reflected, and the reflections revealed something impossible: geometric precision, corners, angles, a structure so massive it couldn't be dismissed as natural. Calculations suggested it was larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, much larger. The data was quietly passed to military intelligence. Not long after, the whispers began. Locals near Denali began noticing an unusual amount of military activity. Helicopters without insignia thundered across valleys where no bases were stationed. Convoys of trucks rolled down gravel roads at night, headlights shrouded, cargo hidden beneath tarps. Hunters spoke of being turned back from areas they had roamed their entire lives, told the land was temporarily restricted for training. One bush pilot claimed to have flown over a remote section of tundra only to see something bizarre: a sprawling excavation site lit with floodlights in the dead of night, heavy equipment clawing into the earth. Within days, the area was sealed off. Maps of the region soon listed it as inaccessible. The official explanation? Routine exercises. But those who've lived in Alaska long enough know, when the military moves like that, it isn't routine. Those who claim knowledge say the pyramid is no mere relic. Its walls are made of black stone harder than granite, absorbing radar signals like a void. Its base is aligned with magnetic north, its dimensions mathematically perfect. More terrifying are the reports of energy emissions. Hunters who've wandered too close tell of their compasses spinning wildly, radios dissolving into static, GPS units spitting out impossible coordinates, sometimes placing them hundreds of miles away. Some emerge from the area bleeding from the nose, their heads pounding as though the air itself were vibrating. A retired Air Force technician, speaking only under anonymity, once said, "It's not just stone down there, it's a machine." Still running. In 2012, an elderly man stepped forward on a local Anchorage radio station. He introduced himself as a retired Army intelligence officer, claiming that he had first-hand knowledge of the pyramid. According to him, the discovery during the 1992 seismic tests led to one of the largest covert operations in Alaskan history. "They found it," he said simply, "and they're keeping it quiet." His voice carried no theatrics, only the measured cadence of someone who had carried the burden of silence for too long. He spoke of underground chambers, of instruments failing, of scientists sworn to secrecy. He claimed the pyramid's true purpose was not tomb or monument, but power, an energy source older than humanity. After his appearance, he vanished from public view. Attempts to trace him led nowhere. Long before satellites and seismic stations, the native peoples of Alaska told stories of forbidden places. The Athabaskan spoke of houses beneath the mountains, chambers of stone that hummed with power, guarded by spirits who punished trespassers. The Tlingit told of black-walled structures hidden by the earth, taboo zones where hunters disappeared, their bodies never recovered. Legends spoke of the ground itself singing, of strange lights flickering in the valleys, of animals refusing to go near certain ridges. For generations, these were dismissed as myths, until modern accounts began to echo them almost word for word. In 2003, a hunter named Daniel Reeves recounted a chilling experience near Denali. He had set out alone, following caribou tracks deep into the wilderness. One evening, as twilight drained the sky, he realized his compass was useless, the needle spinning endlessly. His GPS displayed nonsense, placing him in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That night, he camped uneasily. Around midnight, a low hum began vibrating through the ground, so faint it could almost be mistaken for distant thunder. His dog growled, ears flat, refusing to leave the tent. Reeves described a sensation of pressure in his skull, like the air itself was too heavy to breathe. When morning came, his food was spoiled, his batteries drained, and his rifle's metal parts felt strangely warm to the touch. He abandoned his hunt and returned home. Reeves told his story once at a local lodge. Afterward, he refused to speak of it again. One journalist, intrigued by the whispers, began investigating in the late 1990s. He contacted geologists who confirmed strange seismic anomalies around Denali. He gathered testimonies from locals, pilots, and hunters. He even claimed to have obtained satellite images showing triangular distortions in the terrain. But before he could publish, his home was broken into. His research files disappeared. His computer's hard drive was wiped clean. Within weeks, his name was struck from professional directories. He eventually left Alaska altogether, muttering only that he had seen too much. Radio operators across Alaska have long reported strange signals emanating from the Denali region, low-frequency pulses unlike anything natural. Rhythmic, mechanical, as though coded. Some compared it to a heartbeat, others to the whir of an engine buried deep underground. One operator, based in Fairbanks, logged weeks of recordings before his equipment abruptly failed. His final entry read, "The signal is growing stronger," almost like it's waking up. Weeks later, his home caught fire. The cause was officially listed as faulty wiring. Yet his colleagues whisper otherwise, a scene of dread imagined standing in the Alaskan wilderness, far from the nearest road. The night sky above ripples with green aurora, casting long shadows across the snow. Your compass spins uselessly in your hand. The silence is total, broken only by the faint hum rising from the ground beneath your boots. Suddenly, your radio hisses, not with static but with a rhythm, pulsing steady as a heartbeat. You feel pressure in your ears, your chest tightening as though invisible hands are pressing against you. You turn to leave, yet for a split second, in the glow of the aurora, you swear you see it, the silhouette of a vast black pyramid etched against the horizon, only to vanish when you blink. Was it a trick of the light? Or did the land itself allow you a glimpse of what it hides? An ancient civilization. Some believe the pyramid is the remnant. The Alaskan wilderness is vast, remote, untamed. For centuries, it has been a place of wonder and terror, where endless mountains, thick forests, and frozen rivers conceal secrets no one has yet uncovered. Hunters vanish without a trace. Pilots disappear from radar. Strange lights dance across the night sky. But nowhere is more infamous for these phenomena than Mount Hayes, a massive peak rising over 13,000 feet in the eastern Alaska Range. Officially, it is a dormant volcano, cloaked in ice and snow, with treacherous crevasses and avalanches that make climbing it perilous. Unofficially, it is something else entirely. For decades, whispers have circulated of a hidden base buried deep inside the mountain, a base not built by human hands. A base where strange beings watch, monitor, and perhaps control what happens across the Arctic. And the stories that emerge from Mount Hayes are not the stuff of campfire tales. They come from soldiers, pilots, and even government insiders. The CIA files in 1995, a curious set of declassified documents made their way into the public eye. Buried in the CIA's archives were transcripts from the agency's remote viewing experiments, psychic spying projects, launched during the Cold War under programs like Project Stargate. One of the targets identified by the psychics was Mount Hayes again and again. The viewers described a strange presence within the mountain. They spoke of metallic structures, tunnels, and a powerful energy source humming deep inside. They claimed it was not of this earth. One remote viewer described tall beings monitoring communication and thought patterns across North America. Another said they were using the mountain as an observational outpost. Skeptics dismissed the files as nonsense, but believers saw them as confirmation of what Alaskans had whispered for years. Mount Hayes was hiding something. The disappearing plains, Alaska, has long been known as the Bermuda Triangle of the North. More people go missing here per capita than anywhere else in the United States. Many vanish without leaving even wreckage behind. In the shadow of Mount Hayes, these disappearances take on a stranger tone. In 1947, an Air Force C-54 transport plane carrying 44 people vanished near the mountain. No trace was ever found, despite one of the largest search operations in U.S. history. In 1950, another military aircraft disappeared without explanation in the same region. Even civilian bush pilots have reported their compasses spinning wildly, radio systems cutting out, and sudden turbulence that feels unnatural. Some never returned. To this day, no one can explain why Mount Hayes seems to pull so many from the sky. The Hunter's Tale in 1972. Two Alaskan hunters set out on a moose trip near the mountain. One of them, a man named Don, later recounted the experience in an interview that was never meant for public ears. They were camped along the tree line when they noticed strange lights above the peak. At first, they thought it was the northern lights shimmering green across the sky. But these lights moved with purpose, zigzagging, stopping, and pulsing in rhythm. That night, Don awoke to the sound of voices outside the tent. Not English, not any language he knew, just a low rhythmic chant. He peeked outside and froze. Standing at the edge of the trees were three tall figures. Pale-skinned, their heads elongated, their eyes black and shining. He shook his partner awake, but by the time they both looked, the figures were gone. The lights vanished. The next morning, they found large prints in the snow leading toward the mountain. Prints that were not human. Don never returned to Mount Hayes again. The scientist. One of the most chilling accounts comes from Dr. Michael Harrington, a geophysicist who worked for the U.S. Geological Survey in the 1980s. He had been tasked with conducting magnetic surveys around Mount Hayes. Almost immediately, he noticed anomalies, areas where his instruments went haywire, where compasses spun uselessly. One night, while camped on the slope, Harrington claimed he saw a glowing sphere rise silently from the mountain itself. It hovered for several minutes before shooting into the sky at impossible speed. The next morning, Harrington packed up his gear and cut the expedition short. He later told colleagues he believed Mount Hayes was not just geology, it was technology. Within a year, Harrington resigned from the USGS. Some say he disappeared entirely, the local legend among Alaskan natives. Stories of strange beings near Mount Hayes stretch back centuries. Elders spoke of the Sky People, tall, silent figures who came from the mountain during storms. They warned hunters to avoid the slopes, saying those who entered the wrong caves would never return. One Athabascan legend tells of a man who followed strange lights into the ice tunnels of the mountain. He returned days later, unable to speak, his hair turned completely white. He died within a month, muttering only one word. Watchers, suspense in the wilderness, imagine this. You are a climber, scaling the icy ridges of Mount Hayes. The air is thin, the world silent except for the crunch of crampons on snow. As you reach a plateau, your radio crackles, then dies. Your compass spins. The wind carries a hum, low and vibrating. as though the mountain itself were alive. Then, out of the corner of your eye, you see it, a metallic glimmer in the ice. Not rock, not snow, something buried deep, reflecting light where no sunlight should reach. You step closer, and the ground trembles beneath you, a deep rumble echoing through the earth. Would you continue? The missing hiker in 2009, a hiker named Andrew Collins, vanished while trekking alone near Mount Hayes. Search and rescue teams found his tent, his pack, even his rifle. But his footprints stopped abruptly in the snow, as if he had been lifted straight into the air. The only clue left behind was his camera. The final photo showed a glowing light in the sky. Positioned directly over the mountain, Andrew was never found. Military involvement whispers suggest the U.S. military knows more about Mount Hayes than they admit. Pilots are instructed to avoid the airspace. Satellite images of the peak sometimes show unexplained distortions. Some former soldiers claim radar stations in Alaska have tracked objects emerging from the mountain. Objects that move faster than any aircraft on Earth. One whistleblower, speaking anonymously, said bluntly, "It's not a base we control, it's one we monitor. And they let us know they're there whenever they want." A chilling encounter in 2018. A team of documentary filmmakers set out to capture footage around Mount Hayes. On their third night, they recorded strange lights moving across the peak. One of the crew, a woman named Sarah, reported waking to find a figure standing outside her tent. Tall, thin, its outline glowing faintly. She screamed and it vanished. The footage captured that night shows a single frame, just one, where a luminous humanoid shape appears in the corner of the shot. The team cut their trip short. To this day, Sarah refuses to speak about what she saw, what lurks in the mountain. Skeptics insist the tales of Mount Hayes are nothing more than superstition mixed with cold. High in the Wrangell Mountains of Alaska lies a place frozen in time. A place where red wooden buildings cling to a steep hillside, their paint peeling under a century of harsh winds. Rusting machinery sits abandoned as if the workers walked out one day and never returned. Snow seeps into cracked windows. Shadows stretch across collapsing stairways. This is Kennecott, once one of the richest copper mining operations in the world. Today, it is one of Alaska's most notorious ghost towns. And while its history is steeped in ambition and fortune, its reputation has darkened over the decades. Visitors speak of voices echoing through empty halls, phantom footsteps in deserted tunnels, and figures watching from broken windows. Some believe the men who died here never left. Others whisper that something darker lingers, feeding on the sorrow and greed that once filled these mountains. In 1900, prospectors stumbled upon an impossibly rich vein of copper ore in the Wrangell Mountains. Soon after, the Kennecott Mining Company was formed. Railroads were built, entire camps sprang up, and thousands of workers poured into the remote wilderness to chase fortune. The town of Kennecott thrived. At its peak, it boasted a hospital, school, skating rink, dairy, and even a recreation hall. Copper flowed from the mines, fueling the industrial growth of America. By the time the mines closed in 1938, more than $200 million worth of copper had been pulled from the mountains, an astronomical fortune for the era. But prosperity came at a price. Men died in accidents deep in the tunnels. Machinery crushed workers, avalanches and rock slides buried entire crews, and diseases, carried into the cramped bunkhouses, cut through the miners with brutal efficiency. For those who survived, the work was grueling. Endless hours in the dark, lungs filling with dust, spirits ground down by isolation. When the company finally abandoned Kennecott in 1938, they left overnight. Homes were deserted with furniture still inside, equipment rusting in place, ledgers left open on desks as if frozen mid-entry. What remained was a ghost town, and many believe the restless souls of the men who never left. Almost immediately after abandonment, rumors began to spread. Trappers passing through claimed to see lights flickering in the upper windows of the mill building, though no electricity remained. Hunters sleeping nearby awoke to the sound of boots crunching outside their tents. But when they investigated, the snow was undisturbed. By the 1960s, hikers reported hearing the metallic clang of machinery echoing from the abandoned structures. Some swore they could hear the rhythmic sound of picks striking stone deep underground, as if the mines were still alive with labor. But the strangest reports came from those who dared to step inside. The 14-story mill building, once the tallest wooden structure in North America, looms like a skeletal giant against the mountain backdrop. Visitors describe stepping into its cavernous halls as stepping into another time. Shafts of light pierce through broken windows, illuminating dust that hangs like fog. Conveyor belts sit frozen, machinery rusting in silence. One group of explorers in the 1980s reported hearing footsteps above them on the wooden walkways. Heavy, deliberate, the sound of boots crossing the planks. Yet when they climbed higher, the floors were empty. They descended again, only to hear the steps resume above them. The sound continued until they fled the building. Others describe hearing faint voices, murmurs of men speaking in low tones, occasionally breaking into laughter. A few even claim to hear the faint strains of music, an accordion, or perhaps a fiddle, drifting through the air. Though no such instruments remain, the small Kennecott hospital stands eerily preserved, its rooms still lined with rusted beds and cabinets of broken equipment. Visitors describe a heavy unease here, as if the walls remember the suffering of the injured and the dying. One tourist recounted walking through the hospital with a group when she felt a sudden drop in temperature. Her breath misted, though it was midsummer. She described hearing the faint sound of coughing from one of the darkened rooms. When she turned, she saw the figure of a man lying on a bed, his face pale, his chest heaving as though struggling for air. She blinked, and the bed was empty. Her companion saw nothing. But she refused to re-enter the building again. Perhaps the most famous tale is that of the woman in white. Several visitors have reported seeing her staring out from an upper window of the manager's house, her figure faint, her dress shimmering. Some say she is the widow of a miner killed in an accident. Others that she was a nurse who succumbed to illness. One night in 2004, a pair of hikers camped near the town swore they saw her silhouette illuminated in the window, unmoving for hours. When dawn came, they ventured inside, only to find the floorboards so rotten they could not possibly have supported weight. The tunnels themselves remain the darkest heart of Kennecott. Though many are sealed, those who've ventured near report strange drafts of air that carry with them faint sounds, coughing, picks striking stone, and voices calling in the distance. A former park ranger, assigned to patrol the area, once spoke of hearing a man's voice clearly calling for help from within a collapsed shaft. He radioed for assistance, and a rescue crew was assembled. But when they arrived, no body was found. The tunnel had been sealed since the 1930s. The ranger never forgot the desperation in that unseen man's voice. Some encounters are more personal. The lone hiker. In 1999, a hiker claimed to have fallen asleep near Kennecott, only to wake with the sensation of hands gripping his shoulders, shaking him awake. He saw no one, but heard hurried footsteps retreating into the night. The park ranger. In 2007, a ranger spending the night in one of the cabins awoke to the sound of typewriter keys clacking in the next room. When he investigated, he found an abandoned desk with a typewriter still sitting atop it, its keys jammed with decades of dust. The photographer. In 2015, a photographer captured an image inside the mill building. When developed, the photo revealed the faint outline of a man in a hard hat, standing where no one had been. Historians argue that the mine's workers endured brutal hardship. Death was common, injuries constant, and the grind of labor endless. For many, Kennecott was not fortune but a prison. Perhaps it is no wonder that their spirits remain bound to the place where they toiled, unable to find peace. Others believe the land itself holds power. The Wrangell Mountains were sacred to the native peoples long before miners arrived. To dig into the earth, to rip away its veins of copper, may have unleashed something that still lingers. Picture this. You are alone in the mill building. The southern coast of Alaska is lined with fishing settlements, small, hardy communities that have clung to survival for centuries against storms, hunger, and isolation. But one village stands apart, or rather it stood. The place was called Portlock, also known as Port Chatham, a once thriving cannery town on the Kenai Peninsula. In the early 1900s, families lived, worked, and raised children there, their lives tied to the sea. Fishermen hauled in salmon and halibut. Hunters ventured inland to bring back meat and fur. For a time, the community prospered, and then they left. Not gradually, not dwindling over decades as so many Alaskan towns did when the economy dried up. No, Portlock's residents abandoned it in a single sweep. By the 1950s, not a soul remained. The village was empty, its houses left to rot, its docks collapsing into the waves. The reason? The people of Portlock said they were being hunted. The dark accounts reports stretch back as far as the 1900s of strange sightings near Portlock. Hunters vanished into the forests and were never seen again. Gold miners who tried to work the area told of terrifying noises echoing from the cliffs. But the stories that sealed Portlock's fate began in the 1920s and grew darker each year. Residents began finding mutilated bodies along the streams and forest trails, men torn apart, their bones broken in ways no bear attack could explain. Some corpses were discovered with heads crushed, others dismembered, as though by enormous hands. The villagers spoke of something that stalked them, a creature of enormous size, covered in dark hair, walking upright like a man but towering above the tallest hunter. The native Alutiiq people had a name for it, Nantinak, a giant savage being of the wilderness. Some called it Bigfoot. Others believed it was a demon. The 1930s murders. In 1931, a logger working near Portlock was found dead by the riverbank. His body was mangled, skull smashed with a force no human could deliver. Later that same year, a group of hunters vanished, leaving behind only blood-soaked gear and a trail that ended abruptly in the woods. The locals whispered that the Nantinak had taken them. One survivor, a man named Andrew Kamluk, claimed he saw the creature watching him from the trees. Its shoulders broader than a doorframe, its face half human, half beast. He fled the area and refused to ever return. The fear in the village. By the 1940s, Portlock lived in a constant state of dread. Men armed themselves just to fetch water from the river. Children were kept indoors after dusk. At night, villagers claimed they heard screams echoing across the hills. Screams not of wolves or men, but something deeper, guttural, filled with rage. Then came the raids. Hunters reported being stalked for miles. Fishing parties returned with stories of rocks hurled at them from the cliffs, enormous boulders that no man could lift. One cabin was torn apart in the night, its walls ripped open as though by claws. The people were terrified, the final straw. In the late 1940s, the disappearances grew too frequent. A fisherman named Thomas Jackson vanished after setting out alone. Weeks later, his body washed ashore, mutilated, bones broken, flesh shredded. The elders declared it was no accident. Soon after, more hunters failed to return. Search parties found only strange footprints, massive humanoid tracks pressed deep into the mud, far larger than any human foot. That was when the villagers made their decision. One by one, families packed their belongings. By the early 1950s, Portlock was silent. Its cannery closed, its houses abandoned, its graveyard left untended. An entire community wiped away not by famine, not by economics, but by fear. Modern visitors decades later, Portlock remains deserted. Its buildings collapse slowly into ruin. Moss grows on the cannery walls. The docks creak against the tide. But those who dare to visit report the same unease that drove the villagers away. In 1990, a team of campers who ventured to the site described hearing heavy footsteps circling their tents at night. One man swore he saw a massive shadow standing at the tree line, watching. They left the next morning shaken and silent. In 2019, a television crew filming a documentary reported strange activity, equipment failures, unexplained howls, and a member of their team who woke to find enormous prints pressed into the sand just outside his sleeping bag. Suspenseful scene. Picture it now. You stand in the ruins of Portlock. The forest presses close, thick with mist. The wind carries the smell of salt and rot from the sea. You hear it, a crack, a branch snapping in the woods. Then another. Something heavy is moving, deliberate, circling. The silence grows unbearable. And then from the tree line, two eyes gleam. High above the ground, reflecting what little moonlight seeps through the clouds. Would you run, or would you freeze as the villagers once did, praying it would pass you by? The government silence. What makes Portlock stranger still is how little official record exists. There are no detailed police reports of the killings, no formal investigations into the disappearances. Some suggest the government knew, but chose silence, unwilling to acknowledge something they could not control. Others whisper darker theories, that Portlock was abandoned not because of a beast, but because of secret experiments in the wilderness. Yet every theory leads back to the same truth. The villagers left because they were terrified beyond endurance. Unresolved mystery. To this day, no one knows what really happened in Portlock. Was it a rogue bear, unusually aggressive, killing for sport? Was it hysteria, fear feeding upon itself until an entire community surrendered to panic? Or was it something else, something ancient, primal, and very real, still lurking in the forests of the Kenai Peninsula? The ruins remain, the stories remain, and the fear remains, because when night falls in Portlock, the silence is never complete. Somewhere in the dark, heavy footsteps still echo. On the rugged Alaskan coastline, storms rise without warning. The Pacific crashes into jagged rocks, fog rolls like a living wall, and the sea claims what it will. Sailors call it unforgiving, fishermen call it cursed, and in the autumn of 1918, the ocean took everything from one ship, leaving behind not just wreckage, but whispers of haunting that linger more than a century later. The vessel was the SS Princess Sophia, a Canadian Pacific steamship often called the Titanic of the West Coast. She was no stranger to Alaskan waters. Built for rough seas, she ferried miners, trappers, business owners, and their families between Alaska and British Columbia. But on October 23, 1918, she departed Skagway with 353 souls on board. None would return alive. What followed was the deadliest maritime disaster in the Pacific Northwest, and one of Alaska's most enduring mysteries of the sea. A routine voyage turns fatal. Princess Sophia left Skagway bound for Vancouver, carrying men, women, and children eager to return home before winter locked the land in ice. Passengers included World War I veterans, prospectors flush with gold, and families longing for the warmth of southern ports. But within hours, the weather turned. Snow began to fall. Winds howled. By nightfall, visibility had dropped to nearly nothing. At 2 a.m., the ship ran aground on Vanderbilt Reef, a jagged spine of rock lurking beneath Lynn Canal, one of the most treacherous waterways in Alaska. She struck hard. Steel screamed against stone. The ship shuddered and tilted. But she did not sink, not yet. The false calm. For nearly 2 days, the Princess Sophia remained stuck fast on the reef. Passengers huddled in their cabins as the storm raged outside. Nearby rescue ships arrived but could not approach safely. The waters boiled with waves that would smash lifeboats to splinters. All rescuers could do was wait and hope the storm would ease. From the deck, survivors waved and shouted to the vessels circling at a distance. They were cold, but they were alive. Many believed rescue was only hours away, but the weather had other plans. The final night on October 25th, a gale swept through the canal. Waves grew monstrous, slamming against the reef. Snow blinded the horizon. Witnesses from the rescue ships reported seeing the Sophia begin to list. Her hull groaned as the pounding seas pushed her against the rocks. At 5:30 p.m., a final desperate message crackled over the wireless. SOS, taking water fast. For God's sake, hurry. The ship is foundering. Moments later, radio silence. By the time the storm subsided, the Sophia had vanished beneath the waves. Every passenger, every crew member, gone. The morning after, when the storm cleared, rescuers found oil and debris scattered across the water. Bodies and lifebelts floated face down, frozen by the cold. No one survived, their lives extinguished in one night. Whole families erased, communities left in mourning. The grief was overwhelming. Newspapers dubbed it the Titanic of the North. Memorials were held in Vancouver, Juneau, and Skagway. The sea had claimed them, and yet the story did not end with death, because soon, strange reports began to surface. The haunting of Lynn Canal sailors who worked the canal after the wreck spoke of eerie encounters. On foggy nights, they claimed to see the outline of a steamship moving silently across the water, lanterns glowing, smokestacks belching faint trails of mist. Fishermen swore they heard screams carried on the wind. faint and desperate, as though hundreds of voices were calling from beneath the waves. One captain reported his compass spinning wildly as his vessel passed Vanderbilt Reef. For several minutes, he said, his ship's instruments failed entirely. When the fog lifted, he realized he had drifted dangerously close to the very spot where the Sophia sank. And then there were the ghostly passengers, the phantom sightings in 1920. A year after the disaster, a crew unloading cargo in Juneau claimed a woman in early 20th century dress approached them at the dock. Pale, soaked, and shivering, she asked quietly, "Has the Sophia arrived?" When they turned to fetch her help, she was gone. Decades later, travelers on the Lynn Canal ferries spoke of seeing figures on the shoreline near Vanderbilt Reef, men in outdated suits, women clutching children, all standing silently before fading into mist. In one particularly chilling account, a fisherman reported hauling in his nets near the reef only to find them tangled with what looked like a child's shoe, waterlogged and impossibly old. The survivor who shouldn't exist, one of the strangest tales tied to the Princess Sophia, emerged years later. In the 1930s, a man in Vancouver claimed his grandfather had been on board the ship and survived. The man told of being swept into the icy waters, clinging to wreckage and washing ashore half-dead days later. Yet no such survivor exists in official records. To this day, every historical account agrees no one lived. Was the tale a hoax? A family legend warped by grief? Or was there a survivor who disappeared into obscurity, carrying secrets he never wished to share? Suspense on the reef. Imagine standing on Vanderbilt Reef today. The sea crashes endlessly against the rocks. The wind cuts like knives. Fog drapes the water in silence. You close your eyes, and you can almost hear it. The churning engines, the shouts of crew, the final SOS blaring across dead air. Then, faintly, footsteps on the deck behind you. A child's laugh. The clink of china in a dining room long sunk to the bottom of the sea. You spin around. Nothing, but the feeling lingers that you are not alone. That the Sophia has never truly left. The lingering mystery. Historians argue over the true cause of the disaster. Some blame the captain for failing to evacuate when rescue ships were near. Others insist the storm made survival impossible. But the mystery that endures is not why the Sophia sank. It is why her passengers seem unwilling to rest. Why, more than 100 years later, do sailors still report strange lights on the canal? Why do fishermen still whisper of cries in the night? And why does Vanderbilt Reef, even on clear days, feel like a place of mourning, a place where the dead still walk? Closing chill, the SS Princess Sophia went down in icy darkness, taking 353 lives into the deep. But Alaska does not forget its ghosts. The sea remembers, the wind remembers, and so, it seems, do the spirits of those lost aboard the Sophia. The next time you find yourself near Lynn Canal, listen closely. Look to the fog, watch the waves, because some say, when the night is quietest, you can still see her. A ship that should not exist, sailing forever toward a port she will never reach.